Gather your friends because you're going to be racing them to the card pool. I'm your host, Kyle Robertson,
And I'm Stu Galetta.
and today we're taking a look at the top 10 hidden gems from Scourge.
This is part one of our two-part set review. Our following will be the top 10 money cards from Scourge. But without further ado, let's start our review.
Alright, well, first off, we are starting off here with a card that I think a lot of people know and a lot of people use, myself included. Number 10 on my list is Temple of the False God. It's a land that has the ability to tap and add 2 colorless to your mana pool. Play this ability only if you control 5 or more lands. This is a land here that I think should go in pretty much 99% of all commander decks out there, just because of the power and pure value that it provides. Sure, it only gives you 2 colorless mana rather than colored mana, and it only works if you have 5 or more lands. But just think about the value when you compare this to a really, really expensive and sought-after card like Ancient Tomb. Temple of the False God is not even a rare, has been reprinted so many times, and still is pretty darn close to the same power level. Especially the fact that it comes into play untapped and can immediately give you 2 mana is just way too much of a boost to pass up on, especially one that pretty much any deck can make use of. The only deck I think that I wouldn't play Temple of the False God in is a 5-color deck, because in a lot of cases, even though it may help in certain times where you have to pay more commander tax to bring your guy in or whatever, it just doesn't seem like 2 colorless mana is really going to help you in a lot of situations, so I might skip out on it in that. But suffice to say, Temple of the False God is a supremely awesome land that, like I said, is very easy to get a hold of, should be in pretty much every deck you make. And the ability that it only works if you have 5 or more lands seems like a bit of a drawback, but remember, Temple itself counts toward that 5-land limit, and a lot of commander decks have lots of sources of ramp, even colorless forms like Burnished Heart and Solemn Simulacrum, so it's really not that difficult to get up to 5 lands and make this work, although if you get this in your opening hand, you might want to get rid of it.
Yes and no. I mean, might even keep it depending on how many lands or the style that you're playing. But I like to bring comparison to Sol Ring. This is pretty much Sol Ring as a land, and any other form of Sol Ring that we see in Magic, whether it's Worn Power Stone or Palladium Mirror, they are slightly conditional. So the whole thing about keeping it as a quote-unquote balanced Sol Ring. So to make this as a land, the thing that makes it so it's balanced is the 5-land limit to make it so it turns on. Now, like you said, it isn't hard to necessarily do that, but it is a timing factor. So it isn't just as good as a vanilla land sometimes, but it can also sometimes be better, which is great. But great card. I think it's a staple in every deck, even if you are running 5 colors. Because if you're running 5 colors, you're definitely going to still keep running Sol Ring. And this is almost the same comparison. So moving from a land now towards a black creature, my number 10 is a card called Soul Collector. It costs 5 mana, 3 generic, and double black. And it is a vampire with a 3/4 flying body. And it has 2 effects. First one is Morph, which is, for those who don't know Morph, you can have the option of paying this creature's cost at a cheaper amount for just 3 generic colorless, and it goes onto the field face down as a 2/2, and it can later be flipped over for a different cost. In this case, it is triple black. It also has the other effect of saying, whenever a creature dealt damage by Soul Collector this turn is put into a graveyard, return that card to play under your control. I love this card for a variety of reasons. It's really good because it can get around its mana cost, it can come in cheaper, or if you need it right then for 5 mana, it can come in for 5 mana. It has an evasive body, which is really good right there, even though its stats are a little bit on the weak side. But the really cool thing about this is this can do its own form of combat tricks. So if you play this on turn 3, right, it's face down, turn 4 you have the ability to sneak it in. So you can try to bluff your turn, be like, all right, I just pass, I play a land, I pass, and the people are like, all right, they're just kind of mana screwed right now. They go and they swing with like a 1/1 flyer or something like that, something really small, or even a little guy on the ground. You go ahead, you flip this guy over, that creature dies, you steal it. Being able to steal creatures continually without any mana cost for no reason is really, really powerful. You can take somebody's commander, you can take somebody's combo engine, or you can just take something to build an army of your own. This card has a lot of variety and flavor, and also the fact that it's a vampire really has some good synergies with it to make it so it can go into a tribal build and just get better and better as the game progresses.
Yeah, I kind of like this card as well, Stu, although I do have some issues with it and other cards like it. One is Morph. I've never been a huge fan of Morph. It's kind of a weird ability, and sometimes it can be really awesome, but other times I'm just kind of like, why would I spend more mana to play the same card when I could play something better that I don't have to jump through hoops for? The other kind of issue I have with it is whenever a creature dealt damage by it dies, is when you get the other creature. That by itself sort of implies that you really can't ever get anything that has more power than this card. So the only things you're going to get are little guys that this can chump block easily. And trust me, even if you're swinging with this, hoping that somebody is going to block it, knowing what that bad effect is, nobody is going to be dumb enough to block this thing. However, there are some cool things you can do with this card, one of which is using some kind of pinging effect with it. The one that I kind of come up with always, because it's colorless, is Viridian Longbow, which is an artifact that you can equip this thing with and tap it to ping other creatures. You add something like Death Touch into the mix there, and you just have a machine gun creature that not only kills other people's things automatically, but takes them as well. That's very cool. And as you said, Stu, this is a vampire, a very supported creature type. In this case, Morph actually does work kind of well with this too, because sometimes with Morph, the surprise factor can really, really help, and this is one of those times. Like I said, people aren't going to be dumb enough to walk into this thing when it's face up on the field. When it's face down, you might have a little more of a chance.
I agree with you with that, Kyle, but I disagree with you about the fact that this thing can't get bigger. There's tons of equipments or even anthem effects to make it so this guy can become more of a, a 4/5, a 5/6, etc. I mean, you equip it with like a sword of fire and ice, it's already getting bigger and it's getting better effects. So, I mean, if you go ahead and you put like grafted exoskeleton on this, you give it some infect, yeah, they're torn between giving you a creature or taking poison damage. Now, if you do something like that, they will gladly trade out a creature so they don't lose the game quicker. So, yes, it is a little small to begin with. So, if you have the ability to put counters on a vampire, which we've seen with a variety of cards, or if you have some sort of way to make it so like it's getting bigger from like, I don't know, a Mirari's Wake, for example, it can definitely become a force to be reckoned with.
That is certainly true, Stu, and going with the kind of tribal synergy that we were talking about a little here, that's what my next card here is all about. Number 9 on my list is Mistform Warchief. This is a blue creature that costs 3 to play, 2 and 1 blue, and it's an illusion creature, and a 1/3 at that. Creature spells you play that share creature types with Mistform Warchief cost 1 colorless less to play. Also, you can tap it to make Mistform Warchief's type the creature type of your choice until the end of the turn. This is actually a cycle in Scourge where there were a number of Warchief creatures, one in each color, that benefited specific tribes. There was a goblin one, there was a zombie one, there was a beast one, etc. And they're all pretty darn good because they lower the cost of all creatures that share their tribe by 1 colorless. The reason Mistform Warchief particularly drew my attention is not because he's the most powerful of the Warchiefs, far from it, but he's the most interesting, I think, because he can really benefit any tribe as long as it's in blue and you can play this guy. There's a lot of different ways you could use this then. You could use this in, say, a wizard deck, like one that I play all the time. You could use this in a merfolk deck. You could use this in a whole variety of different styles because all you have to do is tap him to make him whatever creature type best suits your needs. Also, this card doesn't necessarily have to go in a pure tribal deck. If you've got a deck that has a couple of different tribes in it and maybe has different synergies for different creatures, this guy can still help you out, not only because he lowers cost, but also because he can become yet another one of those creatures with that type. Really kind of interesting Lord type effect, and something that I'm surprised we don't really see more of. I know that newer cards probably did this effect better, but still, I just thought it was pretty cool.
I agree with you. There are cards that do outclass this, and you can use the medallions, or you can use a lot of variety of things to make it so your creature spells or just certain colored spells can cost a lot less. But this is something that is a creature that does it. And now it's usually unusual that you see it as a tap effect to become any creature type. This is niche, but I'm not entirely sure where this goes. It probably has a home somewhere, and I'd love to know where it goes. So if any of you guys out there who are listening have an idea, let us know in the comments down below. This is a peculiar find. I'm not sure if it's worth its weight in gold yet, but I'm sure down the line we could definitely find a deck that this is suitable for. Now, moving from your number 9 to mine, I'm going to move us towards an enchantment. Unspeakable Symbol. It costs 3 mana as well. It costs 1 generic and double black. Pay 3 life. Put a 1/1 counter on target creature. Now, the reason why I like this card so much is that this has a very unusual kind of effect. At instant speed, at any time, you pay 3 life to put a counter on any creature, so an opponent or yours. But the interesting part about this is it doesn't use any mana. Now, every time that we've ever seen something to put counters out or use an effect on instant speed, it always uses life and mana, or just mana, or mana and a tap effect. Never just pay life whenever. So if you are using like a black-white life gain deck, you can just make anything big and there's no consequence to it. And it's ridiculous. And I mean, inherently, you can make any creature survive a combat, which is also really powerful because you can create a very strong alliance with other players. I'll pay 3, 6, 9 life. Your creature will live. It'll trade out their guy. You're ahead, and you just don't come and attack me for the next 2, 3 turns. But also, remember, this is black. Atraxa is black. Atraxa can populate. And there's also a whole bunch of other commanders who love having counters on them that are in black as well. So being able to generate counters this easily is just incredible. It's low costed in both the mana and cost to use the effect. And I don't know why I haven't seen this card.
Well, one place that I almost always see this card, Stu, is in decks featuring Marchesa, the Black Rose, the original Marchesa that was in Grixis colors, because she gives herself and all of your creatures the Dethrone ability, which basically makes them stronger when you attack somebody that has a higher life total than you. Unspeakable Symbol is one of the cards that you really fear in that deck, because not only does it turn on Marchesa's other ability, where any creatures you control that have counters on them, when they die, they come back. I mean, that's obviously good in of itself, but you're making your creatures bigger, but at the same time paying life, making sure that your life total is never the highest among all the people in play. So Dethrone is on all the time. And like you said, Stu, the fact that this doesn't use mana and just uses life enables some really powerful and dumb things to happen. So this is a card to fear if you haven't seen it, for sure. The next card on my list takes a bit of a counterintuitive turn, but I will explain it, and I think you might agree with me afterwards. It's called Wing Shards. This is a white card, and it's an instant. It costs 3 to play, 1 colorless and 2 white. And it simply reads, target player sacrifices an attacking creature. Now, the interesting part about it is it also has the Storm ability, which we'll see more of here, which is when you cast the spell with Storm, it gets copied for every spell played before it this turn. Normally, I'm not a huge fan of cards like Wing Shards that make somebody sacrifice an attacking / blocking creature, because most often, people are going to be attacking with multiple things. If you play something like this, you're not really punishing anyone, because while you are getting rid of a creature, you don't get the choice as to what that creature is. So of course, they're just going to get rid of their lowest power, lowest impact thing, and you're still going to get hit with the things you really don't want to have to deal with. The reason Wing Shards is such an interesting card is, number one, because of the fact that Storm is tacked on here. For those of you who don't know about Storm, you probably should, because Storm is a really ludicrously powerful ability that probably should never have been printed. It's just that good. With Wing Shards, though, most people like to use Storm combos to go off in ridiculous, over-the-top type shenanigans during their own turn. Wing Shards is an instant, and when you play it, you might think, well, it's just going to be sacrificing one creature. Again, how is it going to benefit me? But one of the things that I never really realized until I read this card more closely is that Storm copies the spell for every spell played before it this turn, not just your own. So if you think about it, the way most turns go is people play some spells and then attack with creatures. So if you have this thing at the ready and somebody does something like that, you're not just getting rid of one creature. You could potentially be getting rid of their whole team and punishing them for overextending like they just did. This is why I think Wing Shards is actually a pretty serviceable removal spell, especially in a white deck where you don't really get things like this all that often, especially with really weird storm type abilities.
Definitely unique, and I mean, it's not very common you see a really awesome, impactful card just in white. Like, usually it's blue or red or black or any kind of like combination for that deck. So the fact that this is white is something to stand out. And white does use some sort of effects where it's like this creature is attacking, exile it, or this creature is attacking, it dies, or this creature is attacking, return it. It's really into the combat step thing. So this is white at its core. And like you said, Kyle, the storm affects everybody, and that's the main reason why you would want to use this. But also, if you can create infinite mana, you can dump your whole hand, you can dump your whole deck. So I mean, if you can do that at instant speed and you have some sort of combo set up, yeah, this card can really work really well. I mean, there's other cards that I think that can outclass it, but I mean, as a unique kind of way to get under the radar and totally mess up your opponents, this definitely does that, and it does it in a very smooth, subtle way, and I really do like it. It's low costed, and the effect can be greater. Now, moving from your white card to my white card, my number 8, we're talking about Dawn Elemental. It costs 4 mana, and it's white, 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 white. So it's white to its core and at its mana cost for a 3/3 flying elemental. And it has the effect prevent all damage that would be dealt to Dawn Elemental. This is a very simple card, and it's just a little bit on the bizarre spectrum for me because this is a creature that can never take damage. Now, usually for you to have some sort of effect like this, it's usually an instant or some synergies, or like it's equipped with an aura, or it has some sort of equipment on it. So in order to have this effect go, it usually takes something to be set up. This has it to go instantly. It has a heavy mana cost of 4 white. So right there, we're talking mono white, or maybe, an elemental tribal deck, or maybe white and something else. Because if you can generate the mana, like green, white, green can do the ramp to make all the white there that you need for it. But the reason I really like this card is it works really, really well with 2 cards that come right into mind. The first one being Pariah. Now, Pariah is an aura that goes onto a creature, and it reads, whenever you would be dealt damage as a player, deal to that creature instead. So if you have Pariah on Dawn Elemental, you don't take any more damage anymore. It all goes to Dawn Elemental, which is really, really powerful because you're not losing life. It's almost like a pseudo Platinum Angel in a sense, because you won't be losing as long as this creature's on the field. And I would love to see that somebody goes ahead and gives this like a Dark Steel Plate, gives it Pariah, and then goes ahead and makes it so it has, like, I don't know, Whisper Silk Cloak or some form of Shroud or Hexproof. Because at that point, how are you really going to lose the game? It can't be exiled or anything else like that. It's pretty ridiculous. But another enchantment that I really like with this is Worship. Worship reads, as long as you control a creature, your life total can't go below 1. And so as long as this is on the field, it makes it so it's really hard to get rid of, making it so, all right, they can't kill it with combat. You can swing through. You can always block. You don't have to even block anymore. This card will sit up there. You'll live, and you'll be fine. White can search out enchantments really, really easily. So, I mean, you have Open the Armory. You have Enlightened Tutor, Idyllic Tutor. And, I mean, if you're running Saram or something like that in this deck, all right, it's easy to draw into this stuff.
Yeah, I don't think I have too much to add about this card, Stu. Personally, it's a little too vanilla-y for my taste. I wish it did something a little more flashy, and I also wish it didn't cost 4 white to play, because I think that pretty much severely limits your options for where it can be played. Also, I wish it was a little bit bigger in terms of stats, too, because for 4 white, I really think it could be. It is an interesting card, though, and there are definitely some cool things that you can do with it. On its own, not that great in my opinion, but combined with some of the other things that you mentioned, this could certainly be a force to be reckoned with, and might be a problem for a lot of people to deal with. Now for my number 7, we're going to go back to Storm again, and this one is like the quintessential Storm card. Number 7 on my list is Mind's Desire. This is a blue sorcery that costs 6 to play, 4 colorless and 2 blue. And again, it has the Storm ability, where when you cast it, you then copy it for each spell that was played before it this turn. You shuffle your deck, Then you remove the top card of your deck from the game. Until the end of the turn, you may play that card as though it were in your hand without paying its converted mana cost. As the card itself says also, if that spell that you're trying to cast has X in the cost, X is 0. So X spells don't really play all that well with Mind's Desire. But just think about some of the things that you can do with this card. This is ridiculous. The only thing that it really has going against it is the fact that you can't set up for this card because it inherently shuffles your deck and then removes the random top card from the game. So if you hit something like a land, it just whiffs, which is a really bad position to be in, and it's happened to me many a time. But this card is not something that you just play out of the blue and hope you hit something good. This is a card that was designed to end the game, and you should not play it unless you think you can end the game with it, because otherwise you're really not going to get that much value off it. One of these cards, even a couple of copies of this card, probably not all that impactful in the grand scheme of things. But decks that are really built to abuse Storm, they get the spell count up there with things like mana ritual cards and free spells and lots of other tricks they have in order to really up the Storm count. So imagine playing a card like this with a Storm count of 15 or 20 and getting like 20 copies of this card on the stack. That's crazy, and if that happens, if you are playing the kind of deck that tries to abuse this ability, you are probably going to win the game.
Yeah, this is an abusable card by any Izzet deck or any mono blue deck for that point. This is pretty much blue's version of Genesis Wave. You have the ability to go ahead and dump your deck out onto the field for free and make it so that you can go ahead and have a board state that was unparalleled. Yes, you can get creatures out, you can get instants, you can get planeswalkers, and again, you can choose how these work and how it layers. If you're having one go, then another, then another, then another, like you can make it so it works out in your favor. You can wipe the field, you can grow the field, you can just burn someone to death if you really are going that strategy. It's a really, really strong card, and yes, it requires a specific build to work, like you said, Kyle, but Storm is dangerous. Anytime you see the first Storm card, you're like, all right, Storm count 1, Storm count 2, Storm count 3. Like, you start to realize what cards are really leading to your death, and they're not even something that you would really suspect. So, moving from one card that costs 6 mana to another. My number 7 is an enchantment called Grip of Chaos. It costs 4 generic and double red, and it reads, whenever a spell or ability is put onto the stack, reselect its target at random if it has a single target. If you love Chaos, you're going to love this card because it makes it so when anyone has a response to anything that you're doing or anything that somebody else is doing, they're not going to get the result they want. Let's say somebody goes ahead and board swipe, and then somebody goes and plays like something with flash, or somebody goes ahead and counters that, or this or that and that. This goes ahead and changes all that politics up and makes it so, hey, you might have wanted to help somebody, now you're hurting them. You no longer have that option. And for decks where Storm goes or like people are controlling the game, this totally messes up that strategy. And that's really good for red because red hates blue. They just love to like totally bash themselves in the face with each other. So this is something that's so anti-meta on blue, it's ridiculous and it's laughable. Because green's going slow, he's like, you just helped me. White's kind of going a little slower with that front too. So he's like, you just helped me. Well, black might hate you a little bit, but black hates everybody. So it's totally different in that game. But this is a great card to just protect yourself if you aren't going in a spell slinger type strategy. So you can go ahead and make it so your board can have a little bit more protection.
Definitely one of the quintessential chaos cards out there. I know I really don't like cards like this unless I'm playing them, of course, because I am a big fan of spot removal. This card just completely makes all your spot removal unreliable, and you really don't even want to play it because there's a very high likelihood that whatever you just played, a Swords to Plowshares or a Path to Exile or whatever, could end up boomeranging back at you and hurting you instead of the person that you actually wanted to hurt, or even hurting somebody else that you didn't want to tick off that game. So Grip of Chaos, while it does cost quite a bit to put into play, has a really, really powerful ability. Just putting randomness into every single targeted effect, no matter how many things that it targets, is a crazy amount of value for something that then just sticks around doing it for the entire rest of the game. Very impressive cards, too. I like this a lot, although, like I said, not necessarily a huge fan of trying to play against it. So once again, we're going back to blue for me for my number 6, and to, yes, another Storm card. I promise it's the last one. This is number 6 on my list, Brain Freeze. It is a blue instant that costs 1 and 1 blue to play. Target player puts the top 3 cards of their library into their graveyard, and again, it has Storm, so when you play it, it gets copied for every other spell played before it this turn. Again, this is a card that is designed to end the game, and if you get Storm counts up high enough, end the game, it will. There's a number of Storm cards that can end the game in various different ways. Mind's Desire by stringing together a whole bunch of ridiculous spells for free. Ignite Memories is another one that can end the game, much in the same fashion as a Grape Shot type card, for example, that can just do damage over and over and over again until somebody dies. Brain Freeze is going the other way, and if you can't really get damage through to people to try and kill them, or if your free spells and series of crazy things whiffs and doesn't get somebody, milling definitely will, although there are some cases where even milling somebody won't work, because there are effects that shuffle graveyards back into decks. You do have to watch out for that. But Brain Freeze just kind of adds to the toolbox of Storm things that can win you the game, and I thought it was worth mentioning because this is a somewhat more reliable way to end the game than something like an Ignite Memories or a Mind's Desire, in that you can't always guarantee what people are going to have in their hand, you can't guarantee what you're going to get randomly from your deck, but you can guarantee that everyone only has a certain amount of cards in their deck. So I rank this one a little bit more highly than Mind's Desire because I think it has, in the objective sense, a somewhat higher potential to win you the game if you get Storm count up high enough. Just think about having 10 copies of this card. You're milling somebody for 30 right there. 20, you're milling them for 60. This card gets out of hand very, very quickly, and unless somebody has some way to save the cards in their graveyard, they're probably going to be a goner if this thing gets fired off with a high enough Storm count.
This card to me is pretty much Slurpee the Magic card because it's Brain Freeze, and the way how I think about it is every time I've ever had a Brain Freeze, it takes 3 seconds to go away. So each one of those seconds is kind of like a card from your library. So it's like each sip you take is a bigger Brain Freeze you're getting, and that's kind of like what the Storm count is kind of be. But another thing to note, I'm not a big fan of one-shot mill effects. Like if it's just instant or sorcery that just mills right then and there, it's not so impactful. Like I like cards if you're going to mill that can dig deep. Mind Funeral's a great one because it can really expand itself and it can hit a lot more cards. Or like Mesmeric Orb, for example, is a great card that can just continually keep milling people. Now, Brain Freeze is interesting because it has the capability of digging deep. Put this on Isochron Scepter, and I'm pretty sure, Kyle, like in this case, like you keep tapping 2 and you keep milling a person for 3, I'm pretty sure the Storm count keeps going, correct?
Yes, Stu, it's kind of complicated, but Isochron Scepter actually does work with something like Brain Freeze because Scepter specifically says you may cast the copy. Storm only works on a card when you actually cast it, or an effect says cast it. If you just try to copy a spell with Storm through something like Reverberate that says copy target spell, and that doesn't say you may cast the copy, it just says copy the spell, Storm on a copied spell will not work. So those kind of cards, you want to be careful with trying to use them with Storm cards.
Yeah, but the fact that that alone exists like that, I mean, inherently, anyone has to make it so that their turn is shorter just from that effect. I'm just going to play one thing, I end. All right, well, now I have to mill and then mill again. So it's just deadly right there. If anyone's trying to go off, it kills them first. So that's a great way to just lock down the game. And I mean, that's just scary that that exists. That's so simple to pull off. Now, moving from one blue card to another, I'm keeping away from the Storm for all you people out there. My number 6 is called Riptide Survivor. It costs 3 mana, 2 generic, and a blue, and it has a 2/1 body. It is a wizard with morph, and yes, Kyle, I know how you love morph already, so we'll go into that a little bit for you. But its morph cost, again, the generic 3 to lay down if you want it to be face down, which I would argue you would for this card, and to flip it up, it costs 1 generic and double blue. And then it has the effect of when this card is turned face up, discard 2 cards from your hand, and then draw 3 cards. Now, the reason I like this card is for the morph cost. It is a really easy card to make it so that you can filter out your hand. And this is good early, late game, etc. Like, normally, if you are in the later game, and you get like a Brainstorm or a Pond or a Preordain, you're kind of Hail Marying it right there because you're like, all right, I have to make sure the one card I'm getting counts. And if they're just lands, you're in trouble. Or even if they're not just lands, you just go ahead and get the one card. All right, you have to still know what's on top and everything else like that. You're not really going through it. This makes it so that you can go through your deck better. And that can also synergize with stuff in the grave. We've talked about grave recursion stuff before. I'm not going to go too much into that. But the way how this thing goes through 3 cards is really strong. And I mean, you can recur this. Like, this is a wizard. Wizard Tribal already exists. But blue loves bouncing stuff to its hand. And I mean, yes, you couldn't do a traditional blink strategy for this because you have to pay the morph cost first and then flip it over. But it's not too hard to make it go back to your hand, play it again, and keep abusing it. It's a creature. It's reoccurable. It's a wizard. So, I mean, at this point, it's not something that's too hard to tutor out.
There are some good points in favor of this card, Stu. I personally don't think I could justify playing it in any sense because you're basically paying 6 mana if with the morph cost and with then turning it up later to draw 3 cards, and you're discarding 2 even, which essentially nets you 1 card for 6 mana, and it's only on a 2/1 body that doesn't even have any other effects. I think I'll pass on this one. However, it does compare to a newer card from the Amonkhet and Hour of Devastation sets like Champion of Wits. And that's universally recognized as a very, very powerful card, even though it doesn't really, in the end, net you a card. You just draw 2 and you discard 2 on a 2/1 body. That is very, very good, and Riptide Survivor even one-ups that ability a little bit. Drawing cards is always a powerful effect, and selectively discarding cards can also be very powerful. I think this card just makes you pay too much mana for what it does, and it doesn't have a big enough body to really justify it, in my opinion. But as you said, there are tribal synergies, there are ways of improving this card in various senses, so sure, within the context of Scourge itself, this could be a pretty powerful card, and who knows, somebody out there might like it. Well, I'm actually going to go into green now for my next card. My number 5 is called Xantid Swarm. As I said, it's a creature and an insect at that costs 1 green. It's a 0/1 that has flying. Whenever Xantid Swarm attacks, defending player can't play spells this turn. This is kind of the green flying insect version of Grand Abolisher in a lot of ways, because the one place I really do like to play Xantid Swarm is in my Azuri Claw of Progress deck, where this perfectly fits with Azuri being a small creature that adds to your experience counters that you can then pile tons of counters onto to make into a big threat. It being a 0/1 with flying, it's not going to get chump blocked by a lot of things at least. But you might think, why the heck would I even bother playing something like this when it's just going to attack and not really do damage to anyone ever? The reason is because of that spell-like silence Grand Abolisher type effect that is just so good. Everybody knows a Grand Abolisher is an awesome card, and while this card has to attack and is only really half of Grand Abolisher in that sense, green is one of those colors that really, really, really doesn't like other people messing with its stuff, especially at instant speed, because it really doesn't have a whole lot of ways to interact with that. And if you're playing a blue or a black or even a red player with a green deck, sometimes it can be very difficult to overcome their instant speed spot removal. Xantid Swarm sort of solves that problem by making them either use those tricks before the combat step, because as soon as this attacks, it's pretty much game over. There's no way that they can stop whatever is coming at them other than what they already have on the board. And like I said, in the body of a flying creature that may not do any damage itself, but it's going to be very difficult to block and stop that way, especially something that comes out as early as the first turn, I think is pretty darn cool, and I think a lot of decks could benefit from having this in it. Also, it's an insect. Insect tribal should be a thing. I really hope it is a thing at some point, and if it is, this is going to be a key player. Mark my words.
I would love to use it in a lot of decks. It's great for the effect that it makes it so that they can't play spells. So typically for this kind of creature, it'll be on the field, come to your turn, it'll go ahead and attack. Like, you'll skip your main phase 1 and just go directly to an attack. Now, anyone who's played more than a couple games of Magic knows if you see 2 open islands, that means there's a counterspell there, or even 3, that's a cancel, or something like that. If you have something that you need to go off that is big, go ahead, swing at this guy, attack. If he dies, you at least get the safety that you want. If they don't have any flying guys, he's going to be able to hit in no problem. And especially if they just have a counterspell in their hand, I mean, once he hits, they're done. So you can pretty much go ahead and play something. He will live. There's no real combat tricks on that, and that's a really strong thing. Green runs Beastmaster's Ascension. That's a great card. So if you can go in, swing with this guy a couple times, he's no longer the little 0/1. He is huge, and he is now a force to reckon with, especially for 1 mana. But also, green loves its creatures. Green can tutor its creatures in a variety of ways. So if you need this guy now, you can get him now. The fact that you mentioned, Kyle, this is an effect that you don't typically see in green. That alone shines to me. And I think that's something to take note of and make sure that, hey, if you're looking for some kind of anti-meta strategy to work in a different way, this is definitely one, 100%.
And hey, speaking of searching for things in green, Stu, take a look at this next card of yours. I love this one.
Yeah, I'm totally following you with the green train here. My number 5 is a card called Fierce Empath. This one costs 3 mana, 2 generic, and a forest, and it has a 1/1 body. When Fierce Empath comes into play, you may search your library for a creature card with converted mana cost 6 or more. Reveal it, put it into your hand, then shuffle your library. So right here we have a guy who can go this end game, which is really good. You play him early, you find something big. You go ahead and you get your end game set up, and that's really, really powerful. You're talking Woodfall Primus, so if you need your spot removal, you can get it. If you're looking for something to end a game, Craterhoof Behemoth. That's a really good one. Or if you just need more mana, Regal Behemoth or anything else out there that has over 6 mana. And it's really, really good. But also, it doesn't matter of the color. Now, typically in green, you see stuff where it has to bring out a green creature. Not in this case. You can get any creature. So it can be something that's Simic. It can be something that doesn't even have green in it. So right there, that is something that's really good. And it's an elf. Elves love having synergies with each other. And there's real easy ways to tutor out elves. So this is a really strong card for the fact that it's a green tutor. It's a deceptive green tutor because it doesn't get you everything you want. But green loves big guys. It loves getting its mana ramp. So this pretty much says, hey, get a card and just prepare for 1 or 2 turns and you'll have it.
The only really disappointing thing I can say about Fierce Empath is that sometimes when I'm searching through my deck using this card, it really disappoints me that I'm not able to pull out a 5 mana creature because there's so many great 5 drops in Magic. Also, it is a tiny little 1/1 for 3, which is not great stats. But exactly like you said, Stu, this helps set up your endgame, and especially for something like a Craterhoof Behemoth, this thing is just another body on the board that Craterhoof Behemoth is going to make big, and in fact helps it go toward that goal. This is just an amazing card. Tutor on a Stick is excellent, especially when you're getting any kind of really big creature, dragons, or angels, or beasts like the Craterhoof Behemoth and Woodfall Primus. I mean, what have you. Just for fun. Woodland Bellower into Fierce Empath, search for a 6 mana creature to your hand. Look it up. That's a great play.
Yeah, I'm not going to spoil that one for everyone. I'll give them a little homework. But this card also, I'd like to note, is really good in Blink decks. If you're running Rune of the Hidden Realm, or if you have an Eldrazi Displacer, or a Mist Meadow Witch, you can make it so you can continually get more and more value out of this card. And it gets more value the more you do it. You're tutoring, you're thinning your deck, you're getting aggressive plays. Really strong card, and I use it. I love it. I run it every time I get the chance.
Well, going to my number 4 here, this is a card that I actually didn't know existed until a few weeks ago, and it was just one of those moments that blew me out of the water, so I really wanted to mention it. It's called Goblin Warstrike, and it is a red sorcery that costs 1 to play. Goblin Warstrike deals damage equal to the number of goblins you control to target player. Now, to kind of set the scene for you, I was playing against somebody in a multiplayer game of Magic against a Krenko deck, which Krenko Mob Boss is a pretty scary commander and can make lots of goblins very, very quickly. But there are ways of handling it, and I thought even though he was making tons and tons of goblin tokens, I could handle the combat damage and everything. I could sort of lock that down. I was like, oh yeah, I've got this in the bag. I have this game under control. Then he taps 1 red mana and plays Goblin Warstrike and says, well, you die. And I was like, wait a minute. This card does what? For how much mana? So when we were doing Scourge, I naturally wanted to mention this card because just look at this thing. For 1 red mana, 1 lousy, stinking red mana, even if it is a sorcery, I mean, if it was an instant, it'd be kind of ridiculous. But you do damage to somebody equal to the number of goblins you have. In a lot of cases, sure, that could be a relatively modest amount, anywhere between 5 to 10 damage. But still, 5 to 10 damage for 1 mana. That is just dumb. And the fact that you can have a deck like Krenko that gets out an absurd amount of goblins, once you hit a certain amount, people are just gonna die when you play this card. And that's for 1 red mana. 1 red mana. I just can't get over how powerful this effect is. And it's a throwaway common card from this set. Why does this not get more press? I thought Goblin Grenade was a great card, but this just makes it look like nothing.
Yeah, I don't know a single Goblin deck that doesn't run this card. I've actually had the luxury of losing to this card myself, Kyle, a while ago. So I'm thrilled you now have experienced that great feeling in your gut. I like to think of this as Lightning Bolt's half brother because between the two of those, like which one's better? Like, yes, early game Lightning Bolt, late game Goblin Warstrike. And it's really powerful. And like you said, Krenko is a very easy commander that this fits into. But goblins are able to reproduce and create more themselves with a variety of sorceries, other creatures that come into play, and they generate more tokens for them. So this is something that can get out of control real quick. I think in hindsight, they probably would have made this a higher cost card, knowing that Commander picked up and goblins are a huge thing in Commander. This would at least be 4, 5, maybe 6 mana today, so I don't know. Either way, great card. I'm glad you lost to it because now you're on the same page as me.
Well, speaking of 1 mana cards that have a really high impact, you have one coming up here as well.
I do, but instead of red, I'm staying on green still, my home color. My number 4 is Wirewood Symbiote. It costs 1 green, like you said, and it's a 1/1 insect. And it reads, return an elf you control to its owner's hand. Untap target creature. Plays ability only once each turn. So right here, this used to be a more expensive card until the recent reprinting, but this is a very strong card because it has the ability to go off every turn. This doesn't have to have an tap effect or a mana effect, and it doesn't even matter if it has summoning sickness. This is just something that makes it so, hey, if you're running elves, return 1 elf and I'll let you untap any creature. Any creature. Let's look at elves for synergies right there. Imperious Perfect. That's an elf that's low costed that generates more elves. Go ahead, return the token, and untap Imperious Perfect. So you can go ahead and do a whole variety of combo tricks right there. He chump blocks, return it to your hand, untap Imperious Perfect, replace it. But also elves have a crazy amount of mana generation. If you look at Priest of Titania, that just gets stupid real quick. Let me get 5 mana. Now let me get it again. I'm not ramping, I'm just growing at a ridiculous effect here. This is a super powerhouse in elves. Now, if your commander is an elf, this is great protection to keep your commander alive, provided that you have a tapped creature on your field or the field in general. So Mormir Vig is a very strong elf wizard commander. So as long as he's on the field, you play this, he's always going to return to your hand as long as Wirewood Symbiote is alive. So this way you get around the commander tax. He's really good for just protection. So it's a very unique card for the fact it does a lot for such a little cost. And I mean, there's a huge spectrum of what this thing can do.
You don't support Insect Tribal and you're an insect? Traitor! Just kidding. Wirewood Symbiote is a pretty awesome card, and for all the reasons you said, Stu, weirdly enough, it's an insect that supports elves, but it is one of the better elf support cards out there. It really is, for a number of reasons. Of course, you might say, well, why would I want to return my own creatures to my hand? Well, let's just think about what you can return to your hand for a minute. The aforementioned Fierce Empath, which is awesome. Wood Elves or Farhaven Elf, where you can just get more lands by putting them back in your hand to recast. Even Elvish Visionary, where it just comes into play and you draw a card. Seems pretty good in my book for just 2 mana. Wirewood Symbiote being a 1-mana creature itself means it can come out really, really early in the game and start doing this stuff. Priest of Titania just really gets absurd with this card, as does Elvish Archdruid and a lot of other mana-producing elves. Great, great support card for elves. Again, like Goblin Warstrike we just talked about, it doesn't really have much of a place outside of a really dedicated elf deck, but that is where it really shines, and you should play it. Well, speaking of cards that are ripe for abuse, going to my number 3 on the list, one that is definitely that. It's called Call to the Grave. This is a black enchantment that costs 5 to play, 4 and 1 black. At the beginning of each player's upkeep, that player sacrifices a non-zombie creature. At the end of the turn, if no creatures are in play, sacrifice Call to the Grave. Now this is kind of a weird mashup of something like Pestilence and something like Grave Pact, and obviously where this belongs is in a heavily dedicated zombie deck, because if you're playing this in a zombie tribal deck, you're not really going to ever be getting any negatives from this, while everybody else is going to have to keep sacrificing their creatures turn after turn after turn. Again, sacrificing gets around things like Indestructible and Hexproof and Shroud and whatnot, which makes it just an excellent choice. A card that's very similar to this is Anawan the Ruin Sage, which is a legendary vampire that kind of does the same thing but for vampires. Still pretty awesome. And one place this card really shines in is a Glissa the Traitor deck, because Glissa the Traitor is a zombie elf, meaning that she is not affected by something like Call to the Grave, and everyone else probably is going to be. And whenever somebody else's creature gets sacrificed via Call to the Grave, you get to recur an artifact with Glissa. I've played that many times and I've always loved it. This is another kind of one of those very niche tribal support cards that doesn't really do a whole lot outside a dedicated zombie deck in this case, but if you are playing that kind of deck, Call to the Grave is something you absolutely should not miss.
I also like the added part at the end of turn, if there's no creatures in play, sacrifice it. That means if somebody goes ahead and board wipes, it doesn't sacrifice itself right there. And unless the person just board wipes and then doesn't replace their board, that's the only time this card will ever go away. So, I mean, that means that player just left themselves completely open for another attack, or they're going to have to take more time to rebuild. So it puts you ahead even further, which is really good. My number 3 is also a card that is ripe for abuse. It's called Mischievous Quanar or Quanar, I can't really be sure. But it costs 5 mana, whatever it's called. It's 4 generic and a blue, and it has a 3/3 body, and it is a beast. It has 3 effects. First of which, it has Morph. So pay 3 generic, it's a 2/2 face down. Pay 3, 1 colorless and double blue, it flips it up. It also has the effect of when it is turn faced up, copy target instant or sorcery spell, and you may choose new targets for that copy. Lastly, it also has the effect for 5 mana, 3 generic and double blue, turn it back down. So this is a very unusual card because it has the ability to continually propel itself into more morph triggers, which is really, really good. So it is very mischievous in that matter. But the thing that I really do love about this is if you do go for the morph cost, right? You put it face down, you flip it over, you're inherently cheating it out for a lower mana cost, which is really great. And if you don't have the 5 mana, it's something that can do something early in the game if you really need it. Now, however, if for you to get that effect again, you have to pay the mana cost, but it is more mana restrictive by the extra blue. But the point I really want to bring with this is something that is an infinite combo win that is goofy on a whole nother level. There's a card called Rite of Replication, which makes it so that you go ahead and you create a token of something out. All right, well, let's play Rite of Replication. We'll pay the kicker. Let's copy that. Well, now we have a whole bunch of these guys. At instant speed, you can then flip them back down and flip them back up again if you have the mana and copy the Rite of Replication again, inherently making infinite amount of these guys if you have the mana. And how hard is it for blue to make infinite mana? Not very. It's one of the colors that loves making infinite mana the easiest way possible. So this is a card that's a blue beast that is just breaking all the rules everywhere. It is the goofiest card, and I know what you said for Morph Kyle, but I think this has to be the one exception.
It absolutely is, Stu. This is one of those few morph cards that I really can get behind. First of all, it costs 5 to just play it as a 3/3, which you probably wouldn't do anyway. You and I look at Morph in a little bit different ways. You see it as a discount. I see it as actually adding more to the mana cost, although it is split over time. In this case, though, it costs 6 to both play it and then unmorph it with that. Not too much more than its 5 mana original cost, so I could get behind that. Also, it's a bit expensive for 5 mana to turn it face down again, but the long-term value that this card can provide really adds up, so I'm totally okay with that. Most morph cards don't get to be used more than once, and once you've used them, the game is up, there's no more surprise anymore, and most of them don't really do anything. With Mischievous Quanar, it's a little bit different because this can continually provide value over the course of the game.
But I see here on your list, Kyle, for your next card, we have some more tribal strategies.
We do indeed, yes, and this is one of my favorite tribal cards of all time. Not because it's particularly game breaking, but just because it's such great value on one card. It's Siege Gang Commander at my number 2, and this is a 5 mana red creature. It costs 3 and double red, and it's a goblin, so part of a very, very well supported tribe. It's a 2/2 for starters, but when Siege Gang Commander enters the battlefield, you put 3 1/1 red goblin tokens into play. As if that weren't enough, you can also tap 2 1 colorless and 1 red to sacrifice a goblin and have Siege Gang Commander do 2 damage to target creature or player. Now, let's just think about this from a pure enter the battlefield perspective. You're paying 5 mana for a 2/2 and 3 1/1s. That's putting 5 power on the board for 5 mana. That passes the vanilla test right there. And the fact that you're spreading it over 4 creatures rather than just 1 makes it even that much better. Where the real money is for this card, though, in addition to adding more creatures to all the dumb goblin tribal synergies out there like Krenko and Goblin Warstrike, is the fact that you can then sacrifice your goblins for a little bit of mana to potentially start killing off other creatures or start killing other players. In a lot of circumstances, creatures like this can only end up doing damage to other creatures, and that's kind of been the trend in recent years where Wizards has kind of realized that being able to do damage to creatures or players is just too good to really print all the time. Siege Gang Commanders, back before that was really a thing. And the fact that you don't have to tap it to do this, you just have to pay a certain amount of mana and it can be at any time, means you can kind of get around spot removal, you can get around other shenanigans that people are going to try and do. If somebody's trying to board wipe you, you can just sacrifice a bunch of your goblins to hit them in the face with all the damage. Like I said, I don't really think Siege Gang Commander is a game-breaking, game-winning kind of card, but every time I play it, I can't help but feeling happy just because of the value that you are getting from this card and the potential to get rid of a number of other things on the battlefield and maybe even hurt a player a little bit. For a tribe like Goblins that really just runs up the tokens every chance it gets, this is a key card and one that you should absolutely not miss.
This is a card I initially like to hate because I hate it when there's cards that just produce little versions of themselves off the bat, because then I don't really feel like I'm passing the vanilla test. Yes, I'm getting 5 power on the field, but I would like to have it all in one spot. Maybe that's just me being a green player, but this is a card, like you said, it does get the 5 power, so you are getting that, but you are getting so much more. You have an instant speed sack outlet for your entire field if it is goblins, and that is very strong. We've talked about cards like Altar of Dementia, Greater Good, and like those are really good cards because if somebody goes ahead and board wipes, you have a response. You didn't just lose all your stuff, and that's really good. But also, he can go ahead and sacrifice himself. So it makes it so, all right, there's 4 creatures on the field. If I have the 8 mana, I can go ahead and do the 8 damage. But I can also attack first, get other synergies, play other cards to combo off of it. He's really a combo-rific kind of card, and he is one of the greatest goblin support cards out there because instead of being a sorcery, he just goes with all the other stuff that's out there to support goblins. Now, for my number 2, I'm definitely going red as well. I have to bring up this card because it just seems so interesting, and I love it a lot. And Kyle, I'm almost surprised this isn't on your list. I have an enchantment called Sulfuric Vortex. It costs 3 mana. It is a generic in double red, and it reads, at the beginning of each player's upkeep, Sulfuric Vortex deals 2 damage to that player. If a player would gain life, that player gains no life instead. So we've seen a lot of other cards in this game that typically are red that make it so that players can't gain life anymore. So those are really powerful because red loves burning people. But it also makes it so life gain decks are shut down, life link is shut down, and it makes it so nobody can go back to where they were. It makes it really hard for players to come back if they're really close to death. Also, it adds to that too by making it so that people are all getting damage. And I love this because it's kind of like you see with Rites of Flourishing. You play something, and typically you don't get the benefit because, you know, it goes to the next person, they get the extra draw, they get the extra land, where you only get the extra land play. Not in this case. This terrifies other people because it goes right to them, saying, hey, I'm playing this, you're losing 2 at the start of your turn. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. You have to destroy this. And oh yeah, that Oloro that's sitting in your command zone, he's not helping you anymore. He's just going to be like, well, I might actually have to play my commander now, which is really goofy for that. It's a typical red card that you see, but it's very low costed for what it does. And also, if you go into things where you start going in and making it so you can do double damage, like we talked about with cards like Furnace of Wrath, for example, it's doing more than that. And I mean, with the little chips of damage through combat, card costs, everything else like that, it makes it so the game can move forward a lot quicker.
Yeah, as you were saying, Stu, 3 mana for this card, pretty good deal. 2 damage to everyone, including yourself, mind you. This does hurt you as well during each player's upkeep. Not really that big of a deal. The real money here is where it prevents people from gaining life. That stops them from coming back from the negative effects of this card, and eventually guarantees that they will lose the game if this card stays on the field. You just have to be careful that you don't lose the game first.
One of the cards I really love to use is Stigma Lasher, just for the fact that it permanently makes it so that that player for the rest of the game just can't gain life once it's done. This is something, again, it is a little vulnerable because once it's off the field, it makes it so that people can then start using those synergies and gain their life from their Nyx Fleece Lamb or whatever. It's not impossible to get this thing back from the grave. Red has a little bit of problems with that, so once it is off, it might be off forever.
This is a really good card in different Punisher archetypes like Karvek the Merciless or Mogus God of Slaughter, any of those decks that are trying to just continually punish all players with the hope of hurting other people more than you're hurting yourself. And stopping people from gaining life makes this certainly a very valuable addition to that type of card. Good pick for number 2, Stu. If it wasn't on your list, it would have been on mine, definitely.
But I see you also have another card that self-propels itself.
I do, yes. And my number 1 card is just so uber powerful that it had to be my number 1. It's Forgotten Ancient. It's a green creature, an elemental at that, which costs 4 to play, 3 and 1 green. And it starts out as a wimpy little 0/3, but there are great things coming from this card because whenever any player casts any spell at any time, you may put a +1/+1 counter on Forgotten Ancient. That alone would make it pretty powerful in and of itself, because we've seen cards like Tarian Mauler, for example, that just continually get bigger the more things other people play, and this counts your own spells too, so that's crazy. Not only that though, but at the beginning of your upkeep, you may move any number of +1/+1 counters from Forgotten Ancient onto other creatures. Not just your own creatures, mind you, any other creatures. And the fact that you can spread those counters over any kind of creature you have gives you access to all kinds of crazy +1/+1 counter synergies with things like Hardened Scales and Corpsejack Menace and whatnot. The thing that really sells me on this card is the fact that it's not only when just you play a spell, it's not only when other players play spells, when anybody plays a spell. That racks up the counters on this card really, really quickly. And the fact that it can then basically take you from having one giant creature that may not be able to get through to other people to spread that bigness over to your entire army and giving you that much more chance of coming out on top. That's just an awesome card, and it's a very relevant creature type as well, elementals. There's just so many cool things you can do with this card, and I'm glad that it's been reprinted more and come down in price in recent years, because a lot of decks love this card, and I'm glad more people have access to playing with it. It's just so fun.
I don't know about fun. I always hate playing against this card personally. But like you said, it works in a lot of different homes. You can make it in an elemental deck with Horde of Notions at the helm. You can go ahead and put it in any deck that you would put Corpsejack Menace in, so like a Rayhan deck, for example, or Traxa or any of that other good stuff. So it's a really strong card, like you said. The fact that it's a 0/3 doesn't hurt it. And I mean, for 4 mana, a 0/3 that just grows unconditionally, I think this necessarily passes the vanilla test. It may not be the card to just go ahead and swing in and beat, but it's an engine and a recurable engine, and it's not too hard to keep this thing coming out or returning or tutoring for. Now, moving from one card that I've definitely seen before to my number 1, which I've never seen before, and it is going in some decks, I'll tell you what. My number 1 is going to an enchantment called Faces of the Past. It costs 3 mana, 2 generic, and a blue. And it reads, whenever a creature is put into a graveyard from play, tap or untap all creatures that share a creature type with it. This works whenever any creature dies. You then control what happens to the rest of those creatures. So that is very strong. So let's say if you're running a tribal strategy, of which, I don't know, there's changelings. They are every single type. One dies, you then choose the rest of the board, whether they're untapping or tapping. But this works on every person's turn. So if something gets sacrificed, if something gets lightning bolted, if something trades out in combat, this card will respond and respond big. And it makes it so that you are at the helm of choosing what happens. Is that player tapped out now? Like they have no blockers? Or are they now able to respond? It makes it so that you can then change all the combat that can happen. And for just 3 mana, that is really, really strong. And I honestly think the flavor text really ties this together. It reads, the ties that bind can also strangle. Because now you lose one thing, it affects the rest of your strategy. So you have to be a lot more conservative. No matter what, you can give your guys pseudo vigilance, or you can make it so they can get more untap effects. You can make it so that you can swing in and be safe. Like it changes combat on a whole nother level, and I've never seen this card before.
Yeah, neither had I, Stu. And honestly, this is a very good number one pick because of the versatility here. It can either be a great tool for or a great weapon against tribal decks. And I was actually, when I first saw this card, racking my brain and trying to come up with what tribal deck would benefit from having this card in play. I was really trying to think about it. And there's not really a tribe that I can think of right off the top of my head that can benefit from a lot of like tapping or untapping effects, except maybe some wizards, but that's not even really a huge thing. But I'd love to see somebody build with this, and all of you out there listening, do you play this card in your decks? I would love to know what decks you play this in and how you can best use it. Well, that's our top 10 hidden gems of Scourge, and if you thought the water felt just right today, be sure to check back with us next time when we take a look at the top 10 money cards of this set.
And if you like the toys during our pool time today, be sure to let us know. And let us know which ones are your favorites or anything that you have never seen before. Be sure to comment it down below or tweet it at us at mtgthecardpool or email it to us at mtgthecardpool@gmail.com. I'm Stu Galetta.
And I'm Kyle Robertson, and we'll see you next time at the card pool.